DJ Soto had always wanted to be a pastor. A military brat whose family moved often, he found religion a way to find community at each new posting. In the summers, he went to church camp. When it was time for college, he went to Pensacola Christian College, an unaccredited conservative Florida Baptist college that teaches young earth creationism, that gay sex is sinful, explicitly prepares its education students to work in Christian schools rather than secular ones, and which bans students from dozens of offenses, including sexual perversion, gambling, witchcraft, most forms of dancing, visiting movie theaters, and smoking cigarettes. Soto found the culture stifling. He graduated but found PCC remarkably unchristian. He stopped going to church and became a TV producer for 15 years. Then, while doing a story for a local station, he went to a megachurch that he did vibe with. He started volunteering there, designing tech and online stuff for the church. They embraced him, and the head pastor paid for him to go to seminary, mentored him in raising a flock. And he did, for a couple years. But Soto, a church planter, which is basically a fancy American name for an evangelist, wanted to reach people where churches weren't going. Receptive bars, gyms, places where the Christ-curious might be found. John Wesley, the Methodist preacher, took his sermons out of the churches and into the fields, to reach the people where they were. So, like Wesley, Soto decided to start his own church. He quit his job and was about to travel the country with his family when 2 other Christians showed him a VR headset. That changed his life. I'm Stephanie Boulding, and this is Ephemera. Those 2 people were Alistair Clarkson, who'd written a VR Bible verses app, and Brian Leopold, a former heroin addict who'd turned to Christ in rehab. Together, they convinced Soto that they should work together in the VR sphere, work together to reach receptive netizens. Together, they founded an organization called VR Church, which has locations and services in several VR social experiences. Soto preaches, coordinates the ministry, and acts as the face of the church. It's a common setup for American churches. You may have first seen VR Church the same way I did. When a VR chat streamer with 1 million YouTube subscribers asked Soto to baptize him in virtual reality. It wasn't Soto's first VR baptism, though he claims to have performed the first VR baptism ever, of a member of his flock who goes by Pastor Alina. Pastor Alina wears an anime girl avatar in a modest white dress with white hair, and I actually interviewed her about VR Church's experiences since COVID, and about her, the world's first, VR baptism. I'll post an excerpt of that interview to the feed. But the video I saw wasn't of Pastor Alina's baptism. It was of a YouTuber and streamer named Drumsy, who wears a pink-haired anime girl avatar in a pink blouse and black pencil skirt. Drumsy considers himself to be a chronicler and journalist of VR spaces and experiences. I've watched a couple of his videos, but I prefer a longer form approach. Anyway, Drumsy, who has 1 million subscribers on YouTube, is asked by another streamer, Sirmore, who has half that number, if he's willing to be baptized in VR chat by Soto. Drumsy released a 10-minute video of and about the experience. Sirmore also released a similar video with fewer jump cuts from his perspective. I don't know Drumsy or Sirmore's faith backgrounds, and I don't know how earnest or ironic the idea was. What I do know, what everyone who watched the video saw, is that Drumsy kind of treats the whole thing as a fun joke, and even though he does that, he comes out of the experience surprised by how much it affected him.
How do you feel?
I feel like I'm out of breath. I feel like I just had an experience, even though I was just crouching for like 10, 15, what was that, like 30 seconds. I was crouching for 30 seconds. It feels like it was much longer.
So at this point, I think it would be weird not to say this, so I'll just disclose for a moment. I'm religious, and before all this went down, I actually went to church. But I attended a liberal Protestant church in Canada, where Protestant means mainline Protestant, not non-denominational evangelical like it might in the US. I'm not here to convert anyone or talk about what happens after we die, but I wanted to do a story on this before COVID, and I think that now that there's a pandemic, this question has only become more important. I also wanted to take a moment here to reassure my religious listeners that I'm taking this seriously from a place of importance. Which I hope you'd assume for any episode of Ephemera, to be honest. Anyway, my church baptizes little babies sometimes. This was before the pandemic, before super soakers got involved, but it's always a special and meaningful moment, which I think I saw in the video. That said, I've never seen Winnie the Pooh and SpongeBob show up to congratulate the newly baptized anime businesswoman. There's an element of the absolutely surreal to the video that calls into question the familiarity, the sacredness of the experience. And yet Soto talks compellingly about the symbolic nature of baptism. In conversation with his friend Jay Cranda, the online guy for the church that rebanned gay marriage in California.
A little bit, people say, what's virtual reality church like? And I say it's probably like what your church is like, just in VR. So our baptism was, well, describe that for me. Well, we put people in the water and we baptized them. Service, we had some conversation about it. Should we baptize in VR? Does that count? That's a funny phrase that comes up when baptisms, like an angel attends every baptism, like a referee in NFL, and it's like, it counts, touchdown, or no good, that type of thing. So we had the conversation less about us, because for us in VR, the immersive experience, it was just such a compelling, thing to do. As a matter of fact, when I brought it up, nobody went like, no, I don't know about that. Everyone was like, yeah, this would be great. Because when you're in there, it just feels real. So anyways, we took our time. We thought about it. We prayed. Is virtual reality for us? And, our Catholic friends, we have Catholics that come to our church, and maybe there's like a literalist aspect to their sacraments, but we see it more symbolically. And so in the spirit of that symbolism, the Lord's Supper or the baptism, we express that in virtual reality.
All of this was an intellectual curiosity to me when I was first doing research on it. I'd initially sketched out this episode all the way back in February, and I had a different B-plot, looking at VR apps that let Muslims prepare for Hajj. If you click through to the script and my notes, you'll see some brief writing on that front. I might still talk about that later because I think it's interesting, but I couldn't in good conscience continue to write about pre-COVID examples of online-mediated faith gatherings when all of the best examples, the most interesting stories have happened since March. My own church now gathers for a digital service, streamed live over YouTube every week, and by March 17th, 5 days after the first COVID email was sent out to congregants, the church itself was closed for in-person worship. So we haven't observed any baptisms. Neither have most churches. And so on. I'm not trying to be woe is me about getting to get up later on Sunday. But what I want to point out is that many communities of faith have now had almost half a year of virtual congregation. When I received the sacrament of communion at home with my own homemade sandwich bread and a little kid's apple juice carton, It feels real to me. I receive grace. What doesn't feel as real to me is the music. I'm in my church's choir, and when voices are joined in harmony, I feel like my body is a tool of, a conduit to, the holy. More on that in my zine. I don't have the same feelings on my couch at home. Choral and communal singing is a fundamental element of my faith tradition, or a significant element of my faith tradition, and I feel cut off from it during this crisis. So for me, I do feel cut off from one of the ways that I live my faith, but overall, I still feel connected to my religious community and to the sacred. Actually, the choir just started back up again. I don't know how I feel about that. So my question going into this episode is one that a lot of other people have asked, and none of them were really kind enough to answer it. So here's the question. Is a virtually mediated religious experience real? So to understand that, I want to start and draw like a little loopy path. So first we'll turn to Mircea Eliade, a dead Romanian fascist and historian of religion. He's responsible for a word I want to talk about, which is the idea of the hierophany, an appearance of the holy, from the Greek words hieros, or holy, and phanein, to bring to light. If you're a tarot type person, it's the same pair of roots as the word hierophant. A hierophant is the person who reveals the holy to us, and a hierophany is the sacred made spontaneously manifest. For Eliade, the profane and the sacred are fundamentally distinct, different things. Like Durkheim before him, who established the anthropological ideas of the sacred and profane. To Eliade, a particular object, say a star, might appear to be simply a mundane object, but for the believer it has ceased to be simply a physical object and is, instead, transformed into something sacred, something set apart from its profane components. If this is hard to understand, you must not be Catholic, but I'll offer an example from conceptual art. Michael Craig Martin's 1973 work, An Oak Tree. An oak tree is a really infuriating piece of art, one which I'm still not sure I enjoy, but I do think about it a lot, so I guess I do enjoy it. Anyway, so Craig Martin, in his own words,
transforms a glass of water into a full-grown oak tree without altering the accidents of the glass of water.
And that
the actual oak tree is physically present, but in the form of the glass of water.
Craig Martin, a former Catholic altar boy, is playing with our understanding of belief, transubstantiation, and the relationship between the artist and the audience. His glass of water is only an oak tree if you believe it is, if you accept his authority that it is just what he says. The hierophany is only real to the believer. To the atheist, sometimes a glass of water is just a glass of water. Armed with this idea, let's come back to the VR church, to digital baptism, to virtually mediated religious congregation. If we accept that a virtual space is just another kind of space, which you might not, that's fine, but it's where I've landed, and I consider Baudrillard to be good company on this, then if the believer has a religious experience mediated by a virtual space, I think the believer herself is our final mortal authority on whether that religious experience felt or was real. Soto is a Baptist and doesn't recognize transubstantiation. If he were Catholic, would he feel the same way about virtual baptism? To a Catholic, it's heretical to deny transubstantiation, the miracle that an oak tree describes. But to Protestants, communion is itself symbolic of Christ's sacrifice. If you want to know more about what different denominations believe about the sacrament of Holy Communion, I've linked a great old article from beloved and mourned website The Toast in the show notes, where Danny M. Lavery and Nicole Cliff discuss just that. During my pre-COVID research, I found a lot of debate among Christian groups and message boards about whether or not virtual baptism, generally talking about DJ Soto, generally talking about VR Church, fulfills the sacrament. Here's the Daily Show's correspondent Ronnie Cheng echoing what most of them were saying.
And also, does a virtual baptism even count? It just seems a little risky, okay? Virtual means not real. I don't want to get to heaven and God says, hey, your name is on the list. And I'll be like, oh, no, it's okay. I got virtually baptized. And God's like, oh, great. Then I'm literally sending you to hell.
So, do virtual sacraments count? Is DJ Soto's angel hanging out on the 10-yard line, calling fair and foul? Here's what I know. I feel grace when I receive my little communion at home for one. In my earlier B-plot for this episode, the one I was doing research on before COVID, I dove down into fiqh, Muslim jurisprudence, to look at VR Hajj preparatory apps. Muslim scholars tend to agree that digital prayer doesn't count as fard, obligatory prayer, but can count as an example of dua, or spontaneous prayer. If digital prayer doesn't fulfill the pillar of salat, the 5 daily prayers, it seems reasonable that digital pilgrimage doesn't fulfill the pillar of Hajj. These Hajj apps are really cool. They let pilgrims practice navigating the spaces and rites of the Hajj so that they're comfortable fully participating in the experience when they get there. For many Muslims, the Hajj is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I think it's really wonderful to be able to have that sort of app. Guidebooks have long existed for the Hajj, even in medieval times. I found one from 1553. This is just modern technology catching up. Looking at halakha, Jewish jurisprudence, is more complicated. For Orthodox Jews, gathering a minyan, or quorum of 10 Jewish adults required for certain religious obligations, in particular funerals and praying the Kaddish, has become extremely difficult. In Israel, funerals now call for 10 men standing 2 meters apart, and other minyan assemblies are much more difficult. An Orthodox rabbi has ruled that people praying on close but separate balconies can't be considered a minyan, and another argued that certain masks are impermissible because the straps cover tefillin, but retracted that opinion when he took opportunity for further study. On the other hand, my Reformed Jewish friend, a convert and mom of a young daughter, who lives in the same city I do, tells me that
I don't really participate in Minyan, but it hasn't actually been a problem for my shul. They're doing virtual Zoom Minyans and have since the beginning. The thing that sucked the most was Zoom Tot Shabbat. My daughter missed the kids so hard. They started doing outdoor family services at a park a month ago, and it made life much better. Even a lot of super Orthodox congregations did or are doing Zoom Minyans and services, even on Shabbat. The Jewish principle of saving a life being paramount over literally anything meant a lot of halakha was changed and adapted for this pandemic.
in the Jewish faith, the principle of pikuach nefesh, saving a life, which my friend mentions, lets people follow the spirit of the law where possible, and the principles of love and decency where it isn't. In Islam, Sharia rules that a Muslim on a hypothetical desert island with nothing to eat but pork can eat that pork, no problem. It's a similar principle. This stands in stark contrast to me with the reaction of many American evangelicals and Baptists who have treated the suspension of choral singing and in-person gathering as if they're actively being thrown to the lions in the Colosseum. I find their understanding of their faith to be totally alien and even offensive. Like, listen to this guy. He's a televangelist being interviewed on TV.
Obama honored the enemies of Israel. Trump honors Israel. And it's a massive difference. And because of that, I predict America will be minimally affected by coronavirus.
I wouldn't be welcome at that guy's church. I wouldn't have been welcome at Pensacola Christian College. And I don't think I would be welcome at famously anti-gay Saddleback Church or any other Southern Baptist congregation either. I don't respect being pally-pally with people who think my existence is a crime against God. Maybe it's just the Canadian in me talking, but I find the Southern Baptists to be particularly immoral and cruel. VR Church studiously maintains a neutral, adogmatic position, and has atheists, Catholics, and Protestants of all stripes in attendance. For whatever reason, I refrained from discussing political beliefs with DJ, Pastor Alina, and the VR Church Discord server. I never wrote down my questions about the sanctity of trans bodies and the ethics of evangelism, out of a desire to avoid conflict. And I know that DJ is friends with Jay Cranda of Saddleback Church. I'm sure Jay is a nice enough guy, but that's a pretty fucked up employer he has, I think. DJ talks a lot about Christ's tolerance and love, and I think he walks the walk, but there's a lot about churches that avoid disclosing their beliefs that worries me, because I've been there and I've seen that, and usually those beliefs have been that I'm inherently sinful and damned. I don't think DJ feels that way, and I don't think Alina feels that way either, but the Pauline virus that infected American Christianity is asymptomatic, sometimes, until it isn't. I don't mean to end on a hacky, critical note. I liked DJ and Alina and found them to be lovely people. And I watched hours of video of both of them talking about radical acceptance and love. I find the virtual reality congregational space to be absolutely fascinating. And this story has never been more relevant and important. Thank you, listeners, for letting me talk about myself and my own testimony as another kind of primary source. I'll try not to do it too often because I think ephemera is best when I'm amplifying other voices and letting everyone share their stories, but this is my side of the story, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to it. And remember, if you pray in the game, you pray in real life.
Take me to the water. Take me to the water. Take me to the water to be baptized.
Audio engineering for Ephemera is provided by the generous and wonderful Miguel Tanhi. If you like Ephemera and want it to thrive, consider supporting the show on Patreon. Patronage comes with a few hours of bonus content, including that interview with Pastor Alina I mentioned earlier. It also comes with the right to perform a voice for the show, and PDF versions of my 2 zines. There's more details in the show notes. This month, I'm sending fountain emoji out to Robin H., Heather T., Bernard S., Aiden D., Frank West, Ben M., Siberian Pine Hardwood, Al O., Eric, Homo Vulgaris, Meredith H., Discourse Stew, Matthew B., Drew K., Brady B., Alice, Kevin W., Tanky Factory, and my good friend Julio. My sincere thanks to all of my patrons. Without you, I wouldn't be able to do the amount of research that makes Ephemera as good as it is. And, of course, my thanks to you for listening.
Can't stay here no longer, so I'm going back home. Going back home now. Going back home to be.
It absolutely felt real. And it was very emotional, not only for me, of course. I mean, I was bawling, but even for my family members. They felt it, even though they were states away. It's just like, in my brain, it was no different than being baptized outside of virtual reality, I suppose. My emotions were exactly as they would be.